The empire was eternal. At least, that's what those who ruled its golden pyramids and temples believed. The Black River snaked through the land, bringing life and sustenance to a civilization that saw itself as the center of the world. Their gods were powerful, their laws unchangeable. Nothing could bring down the kingdom of the sun. But something was about to change. The Hebrews were shadows in the stone streets. Callous hands built monuments for kings who would never speak their names. They carried the weight of the empire on their backs, enslaved by a dynasty that saw them as disposable cogs in its great machine. They prayed, but their prayers died in the hot desert dust, until a man returned from exile. His name was Moses. He carried the storm of the desert in his eyes and spoke words that were not his own. He said that a God older than the Pharaohs demanded freedom for his people. The king laughed. Gods don't free slaves. Gods build empires. Then the plagues came. First wave, breaking the illusion. The Black River, the lifeblood of the empire, turned to blood. Not metaphorically, real thick, pulsating blood, as if something inside it had died. The people ran in terror, but the king was unmoved. Tricks, he said. Wanderer's magic. Then came the frogs. Thousands pouring from the swamps, invading temples, flooding the streets where the king walked. The priests tried to replicate the phenomenon, to prove they had the same power. They only brought more. Then came the gnats, the flies. The plagues infiltrated the richest homes, infested the golden halls of the palace. But the king did not yield. These are trials, he said. Nothing my will cannot withstand. Second wave, the fall of pride. The disease struck the livestock. The sacred cattle of the empire fell, their bodies rotting under the sun. Then the nobles themselves began to feel the touch of sickness. The priests, the generals, those who sat beside the king, all collapsed, but he remained standing. With each plague, Moses returned. With each tragedy, he repeated the same words, "Let the people go." And each time the king hardened. Was it pride, fear, or something greater than himself? For every time doubt crept into his heart, a shadow whispered in his mind, "If you yield, you will be forgotten. If you are weak, you will be replaced." And so he resisted. Third wave, heaven's vengeance. The hail and fire came. Destruction spared no one, rich or poor, slave or master. But the king, untouched, only watched. Then came the darkness. 3 days without the sun. The empire that worshipped light was swallowed by an endless night. The gods seemed to have turned away. The people whispered, "What if Moses is right?" But the king did not bend. It was no longer about power, nor about fear. It was as if he was shackled to his own defiance. He was a god on earth. How could he bow to another? The final plague, the price of pride. Moses' voice came one last time. But this time, it was not a request. It was a sentence. Death would come that night, not for kings, not for warriors, but for the firstborn. The first generation of a new era would be taken before it could rise. The king listened, but did nothing. And then the screams began. Every house was filled with mourning. Every cradle became a tomb. The empire trembled, not from the weight of destruction, but from the silence of an irreparable loss. Only then did the king speak. Go. But it was not an order. It was an admission of defeat. That night, the Hebrews left, carried with them their hopes, their grief, and a name that would be remembered forever. The God who faced an empire and won. The true plague. But what if Pharaoh never had a choice? What if from the beginning he was destined to resist? The sacred text says, God hardened Pharaoh's heart. But what does that mean? Was it God who prevented him from freeing the Hebrews? Or was it the weight of power itself, the logic of an empire that could never bow, that trapped him? Was it a test for Moses, or for the king himself. Perhaps the worst plague was never the disease, nor the darkness, nor even death. Perhaps the worst plague was Pharaoh's certainty that he could never yield.